They laughed when Nurse Elena Ruiz claimed she once served beside a 4-star general in a war zone half a world away, until the dying man in room 214 lifted a trembling hand to his brow and saluted her. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the quiet dignity of people the world overlooks, hit like on this video, drop a comment below, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Midnight Tales so you never miss a story like this one. Elena had worked the night shift at Fairview Memorial Hospital for 6 years. She was 34, unmarried, and carried herself with the kind of quiet competence that made patients trust her instantly, even if her colleagues rarely noticed her at all. She was not the nurse who got recognition at staff meetings. She was not the one whose name appeared on plaques in the hallway. She was simply the one who showed up, shift after shift, checking vitals, adjusting 4 lines, and sitting with patients who had no one else in the room when the night grew long and frightening. Nobody at Fairview knew much about her past. She rarely spoke of it. When she was hired, her file noted prior overseas medical service, but in a hospital full of ambitious residents and decorated attendings, a line on a resume meant little. So when Elena mentioned, almost in passing, that she had once worked alongside a decorated 4-star general during a humanitarian deployment years earlier, the nurses around her exchanged glances and smiled the way people smile at a child telling a tall tale. One of them, a younger nurse named Priya, laughed outright and said something about how everyone had a story to make their job sound more exciting. Elena did not argue. She simply returned to her rounds, the same as always, letting the comments settle into silence. 3 weeks later, an emergency transfer arrived close to midnight. The patient was an elderly man in his late 70s, brought in after collapsing during what should have been a routine visit to a veteran ceremony downtown. His name, according to the chart, was General Thomas Holbrook, a retired 4-star general with a service record spanning 4 decades, 3 wars, and countless lives saved through decisions few people would ever fully understand. He arrived unconscious, his heart rhythm unstable, his organs beginning the slow, merciless shutdown that comes near the end of a long life. The emergency room erupted into controlled chaos, doctors shouting orders, machines beeping their urgent warnings, family members and aides gathering outside the glass doors with fear etched into their faces. Elena was assigned to his bedside that night, one nurse among many in a room full of specialists fighting to stabilize him. She worked quietly, efficiently, adjusting his oxygen, monitoring the jagged lines on the heart monitor, speaking softly to him even though he could not hear her, because that was simply what she did for every patient, conscious or not. She held his hand at one point, the way she held the hands of strangers every single night, offering the only comfort medicine could not provide. Hours passed. The general stabilized enough to open his eyes, though the doctors made it clear his condition was terminal, a matter of days, perhaps only hours. His family was called. Colleagues began arriving, men and women in suits and pressed uniforms, people who had once stood beside him in briefing rooms and battlefields, now standing helplessly beside his hospital bed instead. Among them was a tall man in a dark suit, clearly someone of importance, watching the scene with the stunned expression of someone unable to accept that even legends grow old and fragile. It was in that crowded room, with monitors beeping and grief hanging heavy in the air, that something extraordinary happened. General Holbrook's eyes, cloudy and struggling to focus, moved slowly across the faces surrounding him until they landed on Elena. For a long moment he simply stared, his breathing labored, his strength nearly gone. Then, with what appeared to be his last reserves of effort, he lifted his trembling right hand toward his forehead and held it there, fingers together, in the unmistakable form of a military salute. The room went silent. Doctors paused mid-motion. The distinguished man in the suit stepped forward, disbelief written across his face, asking in a hushed voice how the general could possibly know this nurse. Elena, tears rising unbidden in her eyes, returned the salute with the same steady precision she had once used years earlier, in a place far from this hospital, in a time she rarely spoke of. She had never lied. Years before Fairview Memorial, before the quiet routines of civilian nursing, Elena had served as a combat medic attached to a humanitarian relief operation overseas. During a catastrophic flood that had devastated a remote region, a young colonel, then not yet a general, had been critically injured while coordinating evacuation efforts for stranded villagers. Elena, barely into her 20s at the time, had worked through the night in a makeshift medical tent, fighting to keep him alive with limited supplies and even more limited hope. She had held his hand through the worst of it, exactly as she had done tonight, refusing to let him slip away. He survived. He went on to become a 4-star general, celebrated and decorated, his story of survival becoming military legend, though the name of the medic who saved him had faded from official records over the passing years. He had never forgotten her face. She had never forgotten his. The people in that hospital room did not know this history. All they saw was an old, dying general spending what might be his final act of consciousness honoring a nurse the staff had quietly mocked weeks earlier for what they assumed was an exaggerated story. Priya, standing near the doorway, covered her mouth with her hand, her earlier laughter replaced now with something closer to shame and awe. The distinguished man in the suit, who turned out to be the general's longtime aide, asked Elena directly how they knew each other, and for the first time in years, Elena spoke the story aloud, her voice steady even as tears slipped down her cheeks, describing the flood, the tent, the desperate hours, and the young colonel who had refused to give up even when his body wanted to. General Holbrook passed away 2 days later, surrounded by family, military honor guards, and Elena herself, who had requested to be present during her off hours, unwilling to let him face his final moments without the same steady presence she had given him decades earlier. At his funeral, held with full military honors, his aide stood before the gathered crowd and told the story of the young medic who had saved a colonel's life in a flooded village, and who years later, without any fanfare or expectation of recognition, had cared for that same man as a dying old general, never once mentioning what she had done, never once asking for credit. Elena did not seek attention afterward. She returned to her shifts at Fairview Memorial, checking vitals, adjusting 4 lines, sitting quietly with patients through the loneliest hours of the night. But something had shifted among her colleagues. The quiet nurse who had once been dismissed with a laugh was now looked at with a new kind of respect, not because of medals or military ceremonies, but because her story reminded everyone in that hospital of a simple truth too easily forgotten in the rush of daily life, that the people who help us quietly, without seeking praise, are often the ones who matter most, and that a single act of compassion, given freely decades ago, can echo forward through a lifetime until it returns, full circle, in the form of a trembling salute on a deathbed. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment below. Stories like Elena's remind us that kindness is never wasted, even when no one is watching. Before we go, I want to ask you something special. In the comments, please write the words, "I believe in second chances," if this story moved you, so that others scrolling through can see just how many hearts this simple act of quiet devotion has touched. Thank you for watching Midnight Tales. Don't forget to subscribe and share this story with someone who needs a reminder that kindness always finds its way back home.